the 15th of February, 1968. The air over the rice paddies near Da Nang hung thick with humidity and cordite. Linh, just 19, clutched the mud of the riverbank, her breath held so tight it burned her lungs. The firefight had been short, brutal, and utterly final. Her squad was gone. Now, the heavy, deliberate crunch of American boots grew closer. This was it. Everything the political officer had warned them about was about to happen. She had grown up hearing the stories. The Americans were monsters, devils who delighted in torture. Nazi radio in the 1940s told of humiliation. Her own cadre leader spoke of unimaginable cruelty, especially towards the women of the Viet Cong. Capture was not just death, it was a fate worse than it. As the shadow fell over her, Linh squeezed her eyes shut, her hand instinctively moving to the small, jagged wound in her left eye. A piece of shrapnel from a grenade had torn through her thin black trousers. "Got one here," a voice said, bored. She was roughly hauled to her feet. The pain in her thighs screamed, and she nearly collapsed. "Sit," the soldier motioned, pointing to a fallen log. She tried, but the agony as her muscle compressed against the wood fragment made her gasp. "It hurts when I sit," she whispered in Vietnamese, a phrase lost to the humid air. She expected a rifle butt to the head. She expected the shouting, the humiliation. Instead, something strange happened. The noise stopped. One of the soldiers, a young man with tired eyes, looked at her leg, then at her face. He didn't shout, he didn't strike. He turned and called for a medic. Moments later, another American knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he cut the trouser leg away. Linh flinched, steeling herself for the blow, but the blow never came. He poured clean water from his own canteen onto the wound, washing away the mud and blood. He handed the canteen to her. "Water," he said. She stared at him. This was the enemy. This was the monster. Why was he giving her water? That moment, the taste of clean water when she expected death, would change everything she believed about her enemy, about mercy, and what winning really meant. Because in this humid jungle, the United States was fighting a different kind of war, not just with bullets, but with kindness. And what happened next would shock her entire command. For the first few hours, the fear was stronger than the pain. Linh waited for the strike that never came. The medic, who had cleaned her wound, wrapped it tightly with a clean, white bandage, a shocking luxury. He then motioned for his canteen, which she still held. She thought he wanted it back, but he just pointed at her lips. "Drink," he repeated. She took a small, hesitant sip. It was just water, but it felt like a betrayal. They searched her small satchel, finding only a half-eaten rice ball, a tattered copy of Ho Chi Minh's writings, and a folded letter from her mother, and gave it back to her. She was led, limping, to a clearing where other prisoners were being gathered. A helicopter descended, its roar tearing the sky. This was the moment of humiliation. She had heard they tied prisoners to the skids, flying them over their own villages. But the soldiers didn't shout. They moved like practiced workers, calm and quiet, loading the wounded, both American and Vietnamese, onto the aircraft. A sergeant, his face streaked with sweat and red mud, saw her struggling to sit on the vibrating metal floor. The pain in her thigh was sharp, but her terror was worse. "It hurts when I sit," she mumbled again, this time to herself. The sergeant looked at her, then unclipped a folded canvas cushion from his own pack, a simple, thin pad meant for hard ground. He tossed it onto the floor beside her. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just pointed, "Sit there." She stared at the cushion. It was a gesture so small, so mundane, it made no sense. It was the quiet symbol of everything that confused her about this new reality. She didn't know it then, but that cushion would follow her, a tangible piece of an unbearable paradox. The enemy was supposed to be cruel, yet he had offered comfort for a pain she hadn't even dared to voice. As the helicopter lifted off, the jungle canopy falling away, Linh looked down at the olive-green cushion beneath her. The vibration of the machine buzzed through it, but the sharp pain in her leg was dulled. She stared at the American soldiers across from her. They were young, just like her, their faces blank with exhaustion. They weren't monsters, they were just men. And that realization was more terrifying than any propaganda. The world beyond her village was not made of devils. It was made of men who followed rules she had never known existed. The helicopter landed on a vast stretch of tarmac that shimmered in the heat. The base at Da Nang was an alien world of concrete, metal, and noise. Lin's boots, caked in familiar mud, felt sacrilegious on the clean, swept ground. She expected to be herded into a filthy pen, but they were marched into a long wooden building that smelled overwhelmingly of soap and hot coffee. The smell alone made her dizzy. It had been months since she'd been near anything so clean or comforting. She saw barbed wire and guard towers, just as she had imagined. But inside, the scene was one of baffling order. Other prisoners, hundreds of them, were being moved through lines. They were given numbered tags, checked for lice, and inspected by doctors. There was no shouting, no guns pointed at heads. The American guards spoke in short, calm English words, moving with a detached efficiency she couldn't understand. When it was Lin's turn, she froze. The doctor was a woman, an American captain, her hair cut short, with a stethoscope around her neck. This was impossible. In Lin's world, women fought and died, but they didn't wear the uniforms of officers who gave orders to men. The doctor motioned for her to sit on the examination table. Lin hesitated, clutching the small canvas cushion the sergeant had given her. The doctor's eyes followed the motion. "Does it hurt?" the doctor asked, her voice professional, not unkind. A Vietnamese translator, a thin man with a nervous face, relayed the question. "Oturunja agior." It hurts when I sit. The doctor nodded, as if this were a normal, everyday complaint. She gently examined the bandaged wound on Lin's thigh, her touch firm and impersonal. She didn't rip the bandage off. She carefully unwrapped it, cleaned the wound again with a stinging, cold liquid, and applied a fresh, thick dressing. She handed Lin 2 white pills and, through the translator, said, "This is for the pain. You have a shrapnel wound. It's clean, but it will be sore." Lin stared at the pills in her palm. Penicillin? Aspirin? It didn't matter. It was medicine. They were healing her, while their planes were bombing her comrades. The paradox was a physical weight pressing down on her. The doctor wrote a note on a chart and tied a new tag to Lin's wrist. "You're safe now," the translator said, echoing the doctor's flat tone. Safe. The word felt strange on her tongue, a lie wrapped in the truth. She was safe from the war, but she had been captured by an enemy more confusing than any devil. They were loaded onto canvas-covered trucks. Lin sat near the tailgate. The small cushion the sergeant had given her was the only thing that felt real. The ride was short. The gates of the camp were tall and grim, topped with barbed wire that glinted in the afternoon sun. This, she thought, is where the real punishment begins. But again, the expected brutality was absent. The gates opened, and they walked in. The first shock was the smell. Not filth or blood, but wood smoke, cooked rice, and was that soap? Inside, the floors of the barracks were clean. The bunks were simple wooden frames, but they had thin mattresses and folded blankets. Lin's group was led to a women's section, small but orderly. They were given soap, a rough towel, and a set of plain dark blue prisoner uniforms. She expected humiliation, forced labor. Instead, an officer, another woman, a stern-faced sergeant, explained the daily schedule through the same nervous translator. Breakfast, work duty, laundry or kitchens, medical checks, lights out. Everything had rules. Even punishments were listed. Extra duty, loss of privileges, no beatings. It didn't make sense. That night, the real test came. Dinner. Lin lined up, expecting a tin cup of watery broth and stale rice. Instead, she was handed a metal tray. On it was a scoop of white rice, a ladle of vegetable stew, and a small piece of cooked chicken. She froze. This was more food than she'd seen in a month. She looked at the other women. Some ate mechanically, others with quiet hunger. She heard one of the prisoners whisper in Vietnamese, "They're feeding us." Another replied, "It's a trick to make us weak." Lin sat on her bunk, placing her canvas cushion carefully beside her. She took a bite. The food was warm, real. And as she ate, the guilt hit her, sharp and sudden. Her family, her comrades, were they eating? Or were they hiding in a tunnel, chewing on a cold root? This act of eating the enemy's food felt like the final, most profound betrayal. She was safe, she was fed, and it was unbearable. By the time summer came, Ling's wound had healed into a dull ache, but the confusion in her mind had only sharpened. The camp, she learned, was not a place of torture, but one of relentless, baffling routine. Every morning at 6, a bell rang. The women lined up outside the barracks for roll call. The American guards, mostly women in this section, counted them quickly, checked names, and then sent them to breakfast. Oatmeal, bread, sometimes eggs. It was never much, but it was always enough. For Ling, the order of each day was both strange and comforting. Back in the jungle, war had made everything uncertain. Ambush, hunger, fear. Here, everything followed a pattern. Even the guards seemed trapped in their own routines. Some were kind, others were cold and quiet, like Sergeant Moore, the woman who ran their section. But all of them followed rules Ling couldn't grasp. After breakfast, the prisoners walked to their work areas. Some repaired uniforms. Others worked in the kitchens. Ling was assigned to the laundry. She spent hours washing sheets, uniforms, and sometimes the guards' clothes, the smell of soap thick in the hot, humid air. For each day of work, they earned tokens, small pieces of cardboard that could be exchanged for cigarettes, postcards, or small comforts in the camp canteen. The first time Ling received her tokens, she didn't know what to do. "This is payment," the nervous translator explained. "It's yours." Ling stared at the thin pieces of cardboard in her palm, unable to believe that even prisoners could earn money in this place. In the canteen, she saw jars of jam, soap, and even American magazines. Some prisoners bought chocolate and shared it. For the first time in months, she tasted something sweet. It was such a simple thing, yet it felt like a miracle, and it doubled her guilt. This was the American weapon, not force, but fairness. When one Vietnamese woman was caught stealing extra rice, she wasn't beaten. Sergeant Moore simply took away her canteen privileges for a week. The fairness confused everyone. One prisoner whispered to Ling, "They punish us, but they never try to break us." Ling began to see how the Americans' power came from rules, not fear. It was a quiet kind of strength she had never seen before, and she wasn't sure if it was mercy or the most sophisticated form of cruelty she had ever witnessed. The physical pain had mostly faded. Lin could now sit on the wooden benches without wincing, though she still kept the small canvas cushion on her bunk, a talisman of her first moment of confusion. The routines of the camp, the roll calls, the work, the bland but filling meals, had become a strange new normal. But as her body healed, her mind began to unravel. It was the American women who confused her most. Sergeant Moore, the one in charge, was a silent, looming presence. She wasn't cruel, but she was cold, enforcing the rules with an iron, impersonal efficiency. She was the camp. But then there was Sarah. Sarah was a medic, the same captain who had first examined Lin's wound. She was young, with short brown hair and a smile that seemed out of place, as if she didn't understand there was a war on. She would visit the women's barracks once a week, officially to check on their health, but she always lingered. She would ask questions, trying her few words of Vietnamese, and laughing when the women corrected her pronunciation. Lin hated her. She hated the easy smile, the clean uniform, the smell of soap that clung to her. She hated the way Sarah looked at them, not as enemies, but as patients. One afternoon, Sarah found Lin sitting alone by the barracks wall, tracing the dust on the floor. "You're healing well," Sarah said, using the nervous translator. Lin just nodded, refusing to look up. Sarah paused, then held something out. It was a book. Its cover was soft and worn. "For you," Sarah said, "to practice English." Lin stared at the object. It wasn't a political pamphlet. It wasn't propaganda about the greatness of America. The cover showed a simple drawing of a garden. She took it, her fingers brushing the medic's hand. The medic's hand was soft, not calloused like a soldier's. Lin opened it. It was full of simple words and pictures like a child's primer. "See the dog. The dog runs. The house is big." This was the most dangerous weapon yet. The political officer had trained her for bullets, for torture, for starvation. He had never trained her for this. How do you fight an enemy who gives you chicken when you expect broth, who gives you a cushion when you expect a blow, and who gives you a child's book when you expect interrogation? That night, under her thin blanket, Lin held the book. It felt heavier than her rifle ever had. For 2 days, the book stayed hidden under her mattress, pushed against the rough wooden slats. Lin didn't touch it. To accept it felt like surrender, a weakness she couldn't afford. She was a soldier of the front, not a child. She went to the laundry, scrubbing the American Guards' uniforms with a fierce, angry energy. the harsh lye soap biting at her hands. The physical work was a relief. It was simple, honest. It was real. But at night, in the stifling, humid dark of the barracks, she knew it was there. She could almost feel its weight beneath her. The political officer had always said knowledge was a weapon. This knowledge felt like a poison. On the third night, she couldn't resist. After the final roll call, long after the lights out bell, she pulled it out. She didn't use a light. She just held it in the darkness, feeling the worn cover, the thin paper. The next day, she took it to the laundry, hiding it in the folds of her loose-fitting uniform. During a brief moment when Sergeant Moore wasn't watching, she opened it. See the dog. The dog runs. It was absurd. It was insulting. What is that? Lin's blood went cold. It was Mai, an older prisoner, her face hardened by years of war. Lin slammed the book shut. Nothing. Trash. Mai's eyes narrowed. They give you trash or they give you a leash. They want to make us pets, Lin. They feed us. They give us candy and soap. Now they are teaching us to bark. The words stung, sharp and true. They were exactly what Lin herself had believed. It's not like that, Lin snapped, but her voice wavered. Isn't it? Mai walked away, leaving Lin alone with the small damning book. Mai's words echoed in her head all day, a perfect counter-narrative to the quiet kindness she kept witnessing. That night, Lin lay on her bunk, her hip aching from a long day of standing. The old pain was a dull reminder. But Mai's words were a new, sharp one. She hated the book. She hated Sarah for giving it to her. And yet she pulled it out again. She looked at the picture of the dog. She knew the word chaw. Now she knew another, dog. The act of learning felt like a betrayal, but the pull of it was, for the first time, stronger than her shame. Weeks turned into a month. Lin's vocabulary grew. Dog, house, water, bread. Each new word was a small, sharp betrayal. She practiced in secret, after lights out, her fingers tracing the letters in the dark. She started to listen, really listen, to the guards, to the announcements, to the easy way Sergeant Moore gave orders. She began to separate the noise from the meaning, and the world shifted. She learned that please was a common word, not one reserved for begging. She learned that thank you was exchanged for small everyday acts, not just for life-saving ones. This casual politeness was more disorienting than any interrogation. When Dr. Sarah came for her weekly checks, Lin would look at the floor, but her ears were open. "How was your leg?" Sarah would ask. "Fine," Lin would reply in English, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "Are you reading the book?" Lin would just nod. One day, Sarah smiled. "Your pronunciation is good." Lin's face burned. It felt like praise for a high-value trader. She turned away, but she couldn't stop the small, toxic warmth that spread in her chest. It was a terrible, lonely feeling to be proud of a skill that shamed her. Mai watched all of this with cold, knowing eyes. She saw Lin listening. She saw the way the younger woman's gaze followed the American doctor. One evening, as they scrubbed the concrete laundry floor, Mai spoke without looking up. "You're like a little bird," she said, her voice low. "They throw you a crumb, and you sing for them. You forget they are the ones who burned your nest." "I don't sing for them," Lin whispered, scrubbing harder, the lie biting her skin. "No. You learn their words, you take their pills, you eat their chicken, you sit on their cushion. Soon you will believe their lies." Mai's words were not angry. They were worse. They were sad, heavy with the weight of an unchangeable truth. "They are not kind, little bird. They are just rich. It costs them nothing to be polite. It is a game, and you are losing." Lin had no answer, because in her heart, she feared Mai was right. But a deeper, more terrifying question had taken root. What if she was wrong? What if this wasn't a game? What if this was just who they were? Mai's words festered. They gave a name and a shape to the vague unease Lin felt, turning her confusion into a corrosive acid of shame. She began to see the camp not as a place of baffling mercy, but as a sophisticated cage of psychological warfare. The clean barracks, the food, the medicine, the child's book, they were all, as Mai said, just a leash. Then, one gray morning, the routine was broken. A guard entered the women's section, not with orders, but with a canvas mailbag, letters. For months, Lin had lived in a vacuum. Now the outside world was coming in. Her hands shook as the guard called her name.
The envelope was thin, the paper fragile and damp from its long journey. It was her mother's handwriting. She tore it open, her heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. The words blurred, the village, bombing, scarce. She read the lines again and again as if she could force them to change, but they wouldn't. Your brother is missing. The rice stores are gone. We eat roots. We are alive. We eat roots. That night, she couldn't sleep. The barracks felt too warm, too quiet, too full of comfort she hadn't earned. The bland, filling meal she had eaten just hours before now sat in her stomach like a stone of guilt. She thought of the piece of chicken she'd had last week. She thought of the sweet, stolen taste of chocolate from the canteen. Her mother was eating roots, and she was learning English. The guilt was a physical thing, suffocating her. Mai was right, but she was also wrong. This wasn't a game. It was a hell of a different kind. The Americans didn't need to torture her with bamboo or electricity. They were torturing her with kindness. The clean bandage, the pain pills, the cushion, the child's book, the warm food. Every simple, humane act was a spike driving her deeper into betrayal. She was safe because she had lost. Her family was suffering because they had stayed. She looked at the small English book in the moonlight. She wanted to rip it to pieces. She wanted to scream. Instead, she just lay there, perfectly safe, perfectly fed, and completely broken. For a week, Linh moved like a ghost. The guilt had hollowed her out, leaving an automaton that went to roll call, scrubbed laundry, and returned to her bunk. She stopped speaking, both the few English words she had learned and the Vietnamese she shared with the other women. She was a silent, walking accusation, and she stopped eating. She would take her tray, but she only ate the plain white rice. She pushed the stew aside. She left the chicken or any piece of meat untouched. When the women were given small bars of chocolate from a Red Cross shipment, she gave hers to Mai, who took it without a word, her eyes showing a flicker of grim approval. This was Lin's new war, a secret, desperate hunger strike, not against her captors, but against their mercy. If her mother ate roots, Linh would eat only the barest minimum to survive. It was a fast of shame. The camp, designed for order, noticed the deviation. "You're not eating," Dr. Sarah said during her next visit, her voice laced with a professional concern that Linh now found obscene. The translator stood nearby, looking uncomfortable. Linh stared at the wall. "You've lost weight," Sarah pressed, holding out a small packet of vitamins. "You must take these." Linh looked at the packet, then at Sarah's clean, well-fed face. She thought of her mother's hands digging in the dirt for roots. She thought of her brother, missing, maybe dead, his stomach empty, and this American woman, this healer, was offering her vitamins? Something inside Linh, held taut for months, finally snapped. She slapped the packet from Sarah's hand. The small pills scattered across the floor. The translator gasped. Sergeant Moore, standing by the door, took a step forward. "No!" Linh shouted, the English word exploding from her, raw and full of an agony Sarah could never understand. She scrambled to her bunk, grabbed the small children's book, the symbol of her entire, horrifying education in betrayal, and threw it at the doctor. It hit her chest with a soft, pathetic thud and fell to the floor. "No! No book! No eat!" she screamed, switching to Vietnamese, the words tearing from her throat. "My mother eats roots! My brother is gone, and you give me books? You give me chicken? It's a trick! It's all a trick!" She collapsed onto her bunk, clutching her stomach, the hunger and the guilt, one unbearable, searing pain. There was a terrible, ringing silence. Dr. Sarah stood frozen, her face pale. The small book lay face down on the dusty floor. Sergeant Moore, however, didn't hesitate. She moved with the same cold, inhuman efficiency Linh had always hated. She didn't shout. She didn't draw a weapon. She stepped past Sarah, picked up the scattered vitamin packet, and calmly dropped it into a trash bin. She then picked up the child's book, straightened its pages, and placed it on the small table. She didn't look at Linh. She addressed the terrified translator. "Tell her," Sergeant Moore said, her voice perfectly level, "that striking an officer is a punishable offense. She will have disciplinary action." Linh tensed, waiting for the blow, the real punishment. This was it. "Tell her," Moore continued, not skipping a beat, "that she will be taken to the infirmary for mandatory nutritional treatment.
We will not have a prisoner die of self-starvation. It is against regulations." Linh stared, her sobs caught in her throat. She looked past Moore to Mai, who was watching from the doorway, her face a mask of bitter confusion. Mai had predicted beatings, torture, humiliation. She had never predicted this. This was a punishment worse than any beating. They weren't going to break her. They were going to heal her by force, according to their rules. Dr. Sarah finally moved. She looked at Linh, her eyes not angry, but filled with a new, devastating understanding. She knew why. She said nothing, but her professional mask had cracked. She looked like a person. "Let's go," Moore said. 2 female guards entered. They didn't grab Linh. They didn't drag her. They simply stood beside her bunk and said, "Stand up, please." It was the please that broke her. She was too weak to resist, too defeated to fight. They hadn't taken her anger. They had simply filed it away under discipline and medical. As they led her out, she realized the truth. They had taken her final weapon. They wouldn't even let her die for her family. They had taken her guilt and turned it into a logistical problem. The infirmary was brighter than the barracks, the walls a stark, clean white that hurt her eyes. A new nurse, one Linh hadn't seen before, entered. She wasn't smiling, nor was she frowning. Her face was a mask of placid efficiency. She checked a chart, then prepared a needle and an IV bag of clear fluid. Linh lay on the cot, too weak to move, too empty to protest. She watched the nurse tie a rubber strap around her arm. She watched the needle slide into her skin, a small, sharp sting that was nothing, less than nothing. The nurse taped it down and adjusted the drip. Linh turned her head and looked out the window. She saw the American flag flying over the central compound, rippling in the hot, damp wind. It was just a piece of cloth, but it represented this system. A system that had an answer for everything, a rule for pain, a rule for hunger, a rule for defiance. She finally understood. It wasn't kindness that was their weapon. Kindness was just a symptom. Their true weapon was this order, this calm, unshakable, impersonal belief in their own rules. They didn't need to be cruel, because their system was so strong it made cruelty unnecessary. They didn't beat her, because a beating was an emotional act, a loss of control, and they never lost control. They had taken her wound, her pain, her guilt, her hunger, and even her rage, and they had processed it all. They had turned her entire being into a series of chart notations and regulations. She wasn't an enemy to be hated. She was a problem to be solved, and now she was solved. The clear fluid dripped slowly into her vein, a cold, clinical nourishment. The physical pain from her wound was a distant memory. The pain of her mother's letter was a fire that still burned deep inside. But the strange, confusing pain she'd felt since that first day, the pain of a world turned upside down, the pain of a cushion given by an enemy, the pain that made her whisper, "It hurts when I sit," that pain was finally gone. It had been replaced by a terrible, cold, and absolute clarity. They hadn't just captured her, they had deconstructed her, and in this clean white room, they were now, piece by piece, rebuilding her in their own image.